Thank you, Chris. I am excited to lead our next panel discussion on the connected worker. But before we get into that, I will go ahead and have our panelists introduce themselves. And we're just going to go in the order of what I see on my screen here. So Lincoln, if you could start off with some introductions, followed by Matt, Nancy, and then Megan, that would be great.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lincoln Bleveans. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Power Supply at Burbank Water and Power in usually sunny Burbank, California. Right now, we've got a lot of smoke. Burbank Water and Power is a vertically integrated, very progressive, very successful utility, electric and water utility serving the city of Burbank. We're part of the city. And my background, very briefly, I've been in the global power industry for about 25 years now, everything from startups and private equity to mergers and acquisitions, and now utility operations. So as well as project development, project finance, I've covered the waterfront. So really excited to be here, very timely topic, and can't wait for the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lincoln, and thanks, Erin. My name is Matt Piper. I'm the Global Director for Utilities and AEC at ESRI. Much like Lincoln, I've got a background in power engineering. I spent 20 years working at a power company in Australia. But more recently, I've come to the US, and I'm now based out of the head office in the Redlands campus in California. Same as Lincoln, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You know, there's been a lot of challenges hitting utilities, and we're interested to hear what's happening and looking for solutions to move forward and how we can actually connect the new digital connected worker.
Great, thank you. Nancy Bui-Thompson. I am a 12-year elected board member of the Sacramento Municipal Utility District in California. We're the country's 6th largest public utility. We have 650,000 customers, roughly 2,200 employees, and we serve 1.5 million people. We're considered one of the most progressive and future-forward utilities in the country, and I've been proud to be elected, and now serving my 3rd time, entering my 4th. And in my day job, I've had a career in consulting, largely in healthcare for the last about 10, 15 years, specializing in technology transitions and integrations. Really happy to be here.
Oh, sorry guys, in real Zoom form, I was on mute. So I am Meghan Peterson, and I am an enterprise account executive for CBT. CBT is a women-owned domain expert integrator. In addition to traditional IT solutions, we assist companies with their digital transformations, as well as the identification, deployment, and scale of solutions.
Thank you all for the introduction. And Megan, I think you're right. It can't be a proper video conferencing meeting if somebody doesn't start talking while muted. All right, let's get into today's discussion around the connected worker. And I'll start with a question for all of you. Megan, I'll actually come back to you and we'll hear from you first. Can you talk about how the concept of the connected worker has changed over the past year, particularly related to COVID-19 and how that's influenced this distributed workforce?
So I actually don't think that the concept of connected worker has changed. I definitely do think that the prevalence and the rate of adoption has changed. And I just see more and more companies, particularly in the utility sector, moving towards, connected worker type solutions.
And Nancy, what have you seen in terms of changes of the connected worker at Smud?
Well, as with many kind of old school utility entities, our utility has been slow to previously adopt a remote work. We just started a few years ago in 2017, laying the foundation to allow our employees to work from home. So, I've been, my day job, I have a separate job, and for 15 years, we've been VPNing, and I was a consultant. And so 3 years ago, we embarked on slowly adapting our culture to working from home, but it was a very small part of our population. I would say, maybe 100 employees, where they needed some flexibility. But because of COVID, we realized, overnight, we have to change the way we do business. And many public entities, many public utilities are considered fairly rigid, and we had to be extremely flexible and bring basically 1,300 employees home within a week. Luckily, again, we'd been transitioning slowly and people had laptops, but I talked to fellow state agencies, and most people have hard desktops, so it wasn't as common and as easy. Luckily for us, we had transitioned a few years ago to deploying laptops, but it was quick to move to using Zoom, Skype, Microsoft for Teams. We had various employees over 5 campuses, and it was seen as more of a let's use technologies and ease of use rather than traveling, where during COVID, we realized it's not just about ease, it's about keeping people safe at home. So very quick change in the way that our employees worked, because our culture has been primarily is being together. We have this Smud cares culture, and that a lot of it is that human touch and seeing each other every day. So it has dramatically changed our workforce and how we do business. But it's exciting to see that efficiencies remain high and connections are still very close, even though we're not physically close.
And Lincoln, have you had a similar experience to Nancy at Burbank?
Very similar, in fact, although without the 3-year head start. We were, when COVID hit, remote working just wasn't on our radar screen. We were very much a traditional face-to-face sort of utility. Whether, obviously that has to happen in the power plants and in the energy control center, has to happen out in the field, but even in the office with customer service, with accounting, with finance. So it was a real jolt for us, but at the same time, it's a little cynical, but to say that, don't let a good crisis go to waste. But it really supercharges and is still supercharging our transition into a more flexible and resilient way of doing our business. And that, to me, is the ultimate takeaway here, that we're gonna be better at everything going forward, frankly, because this has created a jolt that has made us more resilient.
And we'll talk about that in a second, Lincoln, kind of how you've had to reevaluate processes and executing work because of this more distributed workforce. And Matt, what have you seen in terms of changes of the concept of the connected worker? One thing I was hoping you could touch on is, I think before the pandemic hit, people thought of the distributed workforce really as like field crews or people who are out in the field, but now it's just more than that. Can you speak to how the distributed worker has changed in that context?
Yeah, I think well, that's probably the main area we've seen, Erin. I think you're spot on. The concept of a connected worker has typically been related to getting information to the people out in the field. They're trying to take the information from the network or the control center or how the system is operating, and they push it out to the people in the field. It improves their safety, it improves the way that they can collect data. Overnight, like there was this massive, I like the way Lincoln put it, it's this supercharge or a catalyst where all of a sudden the entire organization now has to be connected. It has to know what is happening, where I am, is it safe to go to work? It's everything now is moved to effectively a digital premise, and everyone needs the information shared. And I mean, we've been working with utilities on this concept of a system of engagement to help them pass information seamlessly, to across not just the GIS team, but across their organization. But this has been the catalyst that has set all this in motion at a rapid change that it's unprecedented, really.
Lincoln, let's go back to you and talk about some of those challenges in executing existing processes. So what have some of those challenges been in executing existing processes within your utilities, and where have bottlenecks arisen?
Sure. I would separate it from between the field folks and the office folks. And in the field, it's been, whether it's on the water side or the electric distribution side, it's simple proximity. How do you get people to work sites? How, if you're in a trench replacing a valve on a distribution water main, how do you stay 6 feet apart? How do you control contact tracing? How do you make sure that all of that is being done safely within the larger safety context that you already have? When I look at the power plants, and our power plants are about 100 feet from me here, we actually took 3-person crews that would otherwise be in proximity to each other, and actually split those individuals up. And hats off to my team. It was an incredible, it's a ballet almost of how people move around. In the office though, it really comes down to 3 things: paper, paper, and paper. That's my top 3 challenges in making this happen. We are a very traditional, we have very traditional practices, whether it be contracts, memos. We're still on paper timesheets and still wet ink signatures on almost everything. And that's been a tremendous struggle. Not only do you need to move the paper around, but you also need to handle it. You need to touch, multiple people touching things. So for us, it's been, it's that jolt is positive as well as challenging, but that's been our biggest challenge, I think, is taking somewhat antiquated practices, mostly paper, paper, and paper, and making them virtual in an efficient and a way that people can rely on. So that's really where we are.
Nancy, has Smud had similar challenges with Lincoln's top 3 issues of paper, paper, and paper, or have you recognized bottlenecks and processes in other areas?
Of course. Luckily for Smud, we had started the transition of getting away from paper. I mean, everything was signed and scanned and maybe emailed. So for the past, I would say 5 or so years, there's been a big push to digital, paper signing, but there were still gaps. And so this COVID pandemic really sped up that process. So for example, records and revenues teams, we always used to require a wet signature, right? So during COVID, it's very difficult. So we moved very quickly to digital signatures. So luckily for us, we had started the foundation, but we had to kick it up quickly. I did want to mention also the split that Blevean mentioned, between their in-house and out in the field. So out in the field, we've had to basically split the crews into their own pods. So, we talk about our own family bubbles. We've had to do that with our crews. So with that, not only splitting the crews into these bubbles, we have to stagger the starting times. So even though you are in your bubble, we realize having everybody start at the same time, which is typical of a utility, right? Is you all clock in at the same time and you clock out. And so, really looking at how to appropriately stagger, how to also separate our crews at various different locations so that they're not all reporting to the same location. So we've tried as best as we can to separate our crews and keep them safe. I did want to bring up, an interesting project or concept that we did during COVID is we realized during the peak of COVID back in April that we had essential staff that if we even lost one of them due to a COVID sickness, that we would be down. And there's not a lot of extra people around to fill their jobs. So people in our energy trading group and distributed operations, we made the tough call of actually sequestering 48 of our staff on site at Smud in trailers for 10 days at a time. And this seemed dramatic to a lot of people that were looking from the outside, but we realized that during that really critical peak in Sacramento that we needed to keep our employees safe. And so along with that, we had to provide them a safe place to work. And so I don't know many other utilities that did it, but we were very lucky that our employees signed up to say, I will make that personal sacrifice and live at Smud for 10 days to be sure that the lights stay on and they're personally safe from exposure. So we had a spike, through family parties and what have you. And I think our employees, even though they didn't want to be away from their families, they realized that this was the best thing to do to make sure that the lights stayed on and we had enough energy to do so.
Wow. That did seem, when you said it, I thought it seemed pretty intense.
It was.
Matt, how have you seen utilities change their workflows as a result of the pandemic?
Let's start maybe with what we saw first from at an ESRI point of view. I mean, the very first thing we saw that what happened was, you're probably very familiar with this, things like the John Hopkins dashboard, where all of a sudden people needed to start visualizing and tracking what was going on. Where was the outbreaks occurring? How many people? What's the positivity rates? What's the trend curves? All of a sudden, there was this massive need for visualizing stuff spatially and visualizing it on a map. And that was effectively the catalyst for a lot of companies to say, okay, now we understand what's happening in America. What's now happening in my county? Now what's happening in my organization? And it was when they started thinking, well, how do I understand what's happening in my organization, when the use of GIS really transferred from being that higher level, US view or global view into understanding your particular employee. So we had, thousands of, organizations and utilities reach out, and they effectively wanted to map and understand their customers. Not their customers, their employees. At a way that they've never really investigated before. So checking in each day. So how do I check my, am I healthy? Have I got any signs or symptoms? Am I able to start work? And it's like Nancy just said, it's coordinating and managing work with the staff that you have available. And every day you effectively needed to check in to say, I'm actually available for work. I don't have any symptoms. But how do you schedule work until that happens? And how do you get all that digitally back in so then you can actually coordinate the work and still keep some sort of normality work plan going? And then once they understood their employees and they understood how this was happening, the next thing was, well, how do I actually start doing the work? And it's like Lincoln was talking about, how do I do this? And it's not the same standard operating procedures that they'd done before. It's now, I'm routing from home. Before, all of my estimates and job plans were done from the depot. How do I optimize now that I'm running 2 separate vehicles from 2 different locations to appear at a job site at the same time to coordinate work and not, really extend the time frame that these jobs are meant to happen? This was interesting, optimizing routing, optimizing maintenance programs, doing it all effectively agile, as opposed to the standard estimates and standard jobs that they used to run with. And then once they understood the work plan and now they're moving into, well, how do I actually stay safe while performing work or manage contact tracing? So there was this whole new concept of tracing my employees and understanding where they are. And now what we see as we're moving towards the back end of this, it's now, how do we return back to work safely? It's where are the hotspots? Where can I mobilize staff? What offices can I open first? And it's a completely different set of information, Erin, than what they've typically dealt with in the past. All this information, everything I just spoke about, is not data they've captured for the last 20 years and they've kept it up to a certain level and maintained it. It was almost all new information, and it was external data sources, and it was this all brought together and effectively making business decisions in real time. And for a lot of utilities, that agility is something they struggle with. Lincoln touched on it. There's still paper in a lot of utilities. That's fairly common. To move to that digital approach overnight is quite challenging. And that's where we saw the biggest workflow changes, that if you had any paper in any workflow at any point in time, it became a bottleneck. And that's where they moved quickly to different technologies to try and to alleviate that.
And Meghan, what have you seen similar to what Matt has been talking about?
I think the first thing that we immediately saw was the need for remote mentor type solutions. So, trying to eliminate as many people on a job site as possible. So who's going to help us troubleshoot? The supervisor who's not normally here or is normally here isn't here. So really connecting them and allowing them to, see what they were seeing and troubleshoot in real time. And then that quickly moved into one of the most sought after solutions during the pandemic has been enabling, especially gas utilities, to do remote OQ recertification. So the travel restrictions really hindered the ability of evaluators to get out and get those completed. But it's very hard for someone to complete a task without the use of their hands. So the device that we use actually is hands-free and voice activated. So it allows the operator to perform the task and then the evaluator can see what they are seeing. I've also seen utilities in general move more to digital workflows, especially for frequently done tasks, and then they can have embedded notifications to prompt the next worker that the task has been completed and that it's ready for a digital sign off. So a year ago when I would present, the concept of a digital workflow, it was received with like, I don't know if we're ready for that yet. And I think since then, it's just much more widely accepted and people are anxious to get that process going.
Thank you. Lincoln, I want to ask you something that Matt was mentioning about utilities needing more insight into where their employees are, maybe tracking them more. What role does culture play in doing this? When we were on our prep call, we were talking about how the organizations that are gaining more insight into what their employees are doing also need to build trust so that your employees trust that you're using that information that you're gathering on them in a moral way, I suppose. So what have you seen in terms of culture affecting this transition to a more distributed workforce?
I think you've hit upon the key word in all of this, and that's trust. If COVID-19, for better and for worse, has shown us anything about our culture as a whole and our society as a whole, it's what we trust and what we don't. That's particularly true in this context because I see COVID-19 in particular in this remote but connected workforce as really bringing that to the forefront, both in terms of the need for the utility to trust the employee to do things and do things right when they're not face-to-face with each other. So there's the trust that goes that way, but there's also the trust, as you said, from the employee that, and Matt was talking about, from the employee to the organization, where the employee is saying, you know what, you probably know where I am, you probably know what you're doing. If you've got, I'm hoping Meghan brought one of her hard hats, her virtual hats, because it's, there, in a lot of cases, you're actually seeing exactly what I'm seeing as the employee does the work. So that to me is when we look at the employer-employee relationship, the trust going both ways. You either have it or you don't. You can't hire for it. You can't train it. Maybe you can hire for it if you're lucky, but you certainly can't train it. It's got to be embedded and it's got to be there before you need it. And that to me is one of the fundamental changes that's going to come out of this pandemic when we do come out of this pandemic, that we're going to know a lot more about what we trust, what we don't, in both directions in that relationship. Whether that's, is the bucket truck parked behind the Dunkin' Donuts or not, or is, I'll speak for myself, is Lincoln taking a quick mental break and looking at used motorcycles on the internet? Don't tell anybody, but that sort of thing. What do we do? How do we do it? When do we do it? How does that build up into integrated workflows? These are things that are all of a sudden very much in the forefront and unavoidable. We can't kick these down the road anymore. So it's a fascinating and uncertain time for that whole cultural relationship paradigm.
Nancy, do you have any thoughts on this as well, on how culture has played a role in the transition to a distributed workforce?
Sure. I mean, what I've always told the public, because, Smud is, I joke, it's my night job. I moonlight as an elected board member, and my day job, I have a normal corporate position. And what I've always admired about Smud and our employees is just this whole strategic priority mantra that we've always focused on collaboration, inclusion, accountability, and trust. And that has always been the basis of our employees. And so, like I said, we've been transitioning ever so slowly since 2017 to a remote workforce, and we've never had a problem because our employees trust each other in the work that they're doing. Our leadership is highly engaged. So, prior to COVID, they would have, large town halls within their executive teams. And going forward, we realized that even though we can't be in person, we still need to bring people together. And so creating that culture of family and togetherness and commitment is something that we've continued to do. So, for example, our CEO used to do a monthly meeting. Now it's moved to a weekly video chat, video blog, and each of our executives have their own town halls. But even within teams, they're doing more than just meetings all day. I don't know about you, but I mean, when we moved, Smud 100% online, you could be in meetings from, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. with very little breaks in between. And so what we've seen to create culture, I see it on LinkedIn and on Facebook, is, having fun things throughout the day to talk about things that aren't just Smud related, or having a Hawaiian t-shirt day. And it seems corny, but people need something to laugh about. They need something to remember how life used to be. And I would say that having those online opportunities has been great. And when we bring in nonprofits from the outside to talk about what they're doing in the community and how our employees can help. And so that's, on Thursday, we have a CEO roundtable of local nonprofits. So we're trying to still create that sense of community, albeit virtually, because we realize that our employees still crave being together and laughing together in some way. And so we were lucky to have that culture to begin with, but we realized that we can't just rest on the laurels and the years of all the hard work, is that we need to continue to do that and continue to bring our employees together, both socially and at work.
Thank you, Lincoln and Nancy, for your thoughts on kind of utility culture and how this has influenced this transition. So Matt and Meghan, I want to go to you guys, and I want to talk about how digital devices can help solve some of the challenges that have actually already been mentioned. Meghan, you talked about maybe not having expertise or access to knowledge or expertise on site. How does a digital device play a role in kind of aiding or getting over that challenge? And then maybe also, how do you use digital devices to continue to keep that knowledge in the institution and create safe work environments as workforces change and people retire and new hires come in? So Meghan, if you could start off talking about just how you see digital devices kind of helping with some of these challenges, and Matt, I would love to hear from you as well.
So I think training is an area that devices can have a huge impact, as well as a large return on investment when they're using these different devices. So technology continues to evolve, specifically wearable technology. Utility workers are often working in confined spaces. So whether that's a manhole or a lineman's bucket, the ability to remotely view and see what the worker is seeing and guide them through a task is hugely beneficial. Also, just having training videos loaded onto a device for viewing in the field so that newer workers have resources at their hands. It's also just going to become increasingly important to capture the knowledge of this aging workforce, and these devices are primed to do it. So whether that's creating a workflow, a digital workflow from a task that's just not done that frequently, because I feel like that's where things really start to get tricky, when all of a sudden there's something that's done every couple of years and they go, oh no, no one can do this. So I think capturing that, recognizing it, and then being able to record all of these events is going to be critical. And I think technology is in a great place to be able to assist with that.
I agree. I think Megan's touched on something there, but I don't think the technology is really the issue anymore. I think the technology has come a long way in the recent years, and we're sort of, it's an exciting time in the industry. I mean, Lincoln touched on this concept of being the catalyst, touched on this trust, and Nancy was alluding to the culture. Look, my experience is that utilities traditionally are a little bit slow to change. They are a little bit more change adverse than most other industries. They like to have somebody else done it before. They like to not be on the bleeding edge. It's Nancy's smiling, but this is a reality that we face, and the technology is sometimes there, but we're not going to be the first one. And if we were to try and work with the utility and say, we would like to move your entire workforce to now work remote, and let's do this overnight, this would be a 2 to 3 year project. I'm sure it would have multiple millions of dollars spent on how to best manage this. This happened overnight for many utilities. It was a light switch that just occurred, and everyone was scrambling around to try and do this. And some of those preconceived reasons why we can't do things have really been pushed to the sideline, and now it's looking forward about, okay, how do we move forward? And I see, safety is paramount for every utility, but there's new levels of safety that the technology is now integrating into workflows and moving into some of these solutions. One of the best examples I can probably think of is this concept that utilities go and they work on site together, but they also go and, like for telecoms and stuff, they go and actually work with customers. They're in their homes. They're engaging in close contact with customers. So this big brother thing that sort of Lincoln was alluding to, am I hiding out the back of Dunkin' Donuts? It's an interesting analogy, but it's also the same mindset that this is why we don't want you to know where we are. But the reality is now it's almost a requirement, or it's almost an expectation that if you're going out and doing work, and you're working both internally with other employees, but also going out and working in the community, it's almost an obligation now that you should be able to report back and do contact tracing. So there's multiple technologies. We have a product called Tracker, but the employees can turn it on and off, but it tracks and lets them know that I was here at this time, and all the auditing is available now. That ability to know that you were there at this point in time and somebody else was there at that same point in time, and we were in proximity, and now we can actually report back and say, okay, yesterday when this happened, if you're feeling sick today, we need to now let these people know and track that back. It's a really simple example, but it's one of those ones that pushes the traditional mindset and the culture of many utilities that, no, I don't want you to know where I am. But now it's almost a safety requirement, and it's almost an obligation back to the community that if you're working and you're cross collaborating, that you should have the technology now to be able to perform that tracking back and that understanding. And that's just one example of what I see the technology now being used for, Erin. I mean, we can push it into the safety of providing all the network digitally and things like that. But the power of location and that sort of intelligence to track and understand your employees and the relationships to the network, it's a really exciting time. And I think this has forced a lot of utilities to rethink some of these legacy mindsets or culture barriers that stopped them moving forward in previous times.
So I do have a few questions left for y'all, but my coworker Erin has done a good job in asking two of these questions in one question in a much more concise way. So I'm going to go ahead and read her question from the audience Q&A chat box. Also, I wanted to let the audience know that we're about to get into audience Q&A. So if you have a question for our panelists, go ahead and submit it via the chat box. So the question is, and Lincoln, it's directed to you, but Nancy, you may have thoughts on this as well. Now that your utility has been forced to change and digitalize, will you keep the new processes in place even when people go back to the office?
Oh boy, that question is absolutely spot on, and frankly, the answer is a work in progress. That's a big question for us. There's we're at a point, as Matt pointed out. Utilities are famous for boldly going where everyone has gone before when it comes to innovation. And so, yeah, we've picked up on a little bit of e-signatures, a little bit of electronic workflow, but we're now trying to figure out, both as a utility and as a city government as a whole, what does the new normal look like? Is it a slightly smarter version of the old? Or do we really want to go full steam into the future or into the present, actually? So that question, it remains to be seen. We actually are arguing about it a lot. I just refinanced my mortgage at obscenely low interest rates, but we did it all online in LA, suburban LA, eye-wateringly large mortgage for an eye-wateringly small house. We did it all online. It was all click, click, click electronic signatures. So if we can do that for a mortgage, why can't we do that for a $10,000 purchase order? So we're working through that, and the jury is still out, frankly. Well, we'll have to see. I'm hopeful that we can get to we can at least bring ourselves into the present, if not into the future.
And Nancy, what about Smud?
Sure. As I mentioned before, luckily we've had this long journey, but as Matt mentioned, it's been slow. You move slowly, you don't want to move too quickly. And so we've been on this journey for the past several years. We have a process improvement team. So it's not just about turning paper to digital, right? Because you have to look at end-to-end processes from, procedures and people and who's involved. And so luckily for Smud, we've had those really strong teams in place. But what the pandemic has done is made us speed up that. We're known to be very cautious and just roll out team by team and have lots of long conversations. And now we've seen that, we all wanted to go digital first, but now we've realized that you can do it. You can do it really quickly. If you get the right people in the room and you have the right communication and the right outreach, you can move faster. So this for sure will be, continue to be the future of Smud. I think now we know that we are capable of doing it efficiently and quickly, but also doing it well, because it's not just about throwing it out there. We realize that we can mobilize the right teams of people that can make sure that the change management's in place and the communication's in place and the training's in place, because that's all really important, because you can roll out whatever, but if people don't know how to use it and they don't want to feel like they need to use it, then they're not going to use it. And so we realize that you don't need a 9-month plan for these, that if you bring the right people together quickly, we can get it done and out the door. So I'm excited to see more things that we can bring online, because there are still some sticky areas where there is a paper process that we can't quite shake out of their hands. And so those few remaining processes will be a little bit more challenging, but this is where we're going to go. And I think our employees are really happy for it.
And Erin, if I could add one more thing to that, I think the other kind of macro trend that really helps us out here is a generational shift in the utility world, in the world in general, but in the utility world in particular, where you're seeing a lot of people and a lot of institutional knowledge retire, and we have to capture that. But at the same time, I look at, I'm 53, full disclosure, so I'm kind of in the middle of all this, but I look at the younger people in the utility, and it's a generation that is simply fundamentally comfortable with technology and fundamentally comfortable with the fact that Apple knows where I am because they know where my phone is. Mark Zuckerberg knows everything about me. There's a greater comfort with that. There's a greater fluency in technology. So what would have been a kind of an, oh my God, we've got to go to technology solution is now well, yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and do this because that's how the world works now. I see that macro trend actually accelerating the innovation in the utility industry to everyone's benefit. Whereas if it were up to, middle-aged people like me, it might go a lot slower. So I am really excited about what we can accomplish. And hopefully I can set it in motion, and then my successors can really put it in 6th gear and run with it.
I see some head shaking from the other panelists. Matt, do you have anything to add in response to what Lincoln was just saying?
I think he's spot on. I mean, there's hundreds of the years worth of knowledge at the moment in utilities that are looking to leave, and this rapid shift to digital is if those that are closer to that age are now thinking, well, this is just too much of a step change for me. I'm not set up to do all this, Zoom stuff and everything else. It's unfortunate, but there is actually a fair employment gap between some of the more senior, engineers in the organizations and the people coming through. But I think he's right. That adoption to we won't stereotype them as all as millennials, but the younger generations coming through are definitely more adaptive to the new technologies, to the change, and I mean, it's almost embarrassing sometimes when you say, can you go capture this information on paper, come back, and 3 months later we'll get it back into our enterprise systems as a markup on. It's really not the acceptable work practices, and in their brains they're already thinking, are you kidding me? I can write the program tomorrow to make that happen. You know, we can do that over here. And it's that innovation, and that I think that's what Nancy's talking about. You get the right people in the room with the right technology, and you can really churn out some really nice solutions within your organization to streamline these processes.
And Megan, what are your thoughts on this point?
So, I mean, I think, yeah, everyone's at this point where they say, do I go back to the old way, or am I going to keep evolving? And so for us, you know, every opportunity, all of the solutions that we deploy have a long-term value. It's actually part of our use case identification process. We take the approach of crawl, walk, run. So as we deploy these solutions and then workers become more and more comfortable with the technology, the solutions are going to become more and more complex. So it's a bit of a learning curve. And then, you know, they'll continue to learn and utilize them and then expand on their capabilities. So for example, maybe someone is currently using a remote mentor solution to troubleshoot. And then from there, we start incorporating some augmented reality. And then maybe we start pulling in asset information from wired or wireless sensors. So like the technology is just laying the groundwork for what's to come. And I think as long as we just keep taking that momentum and riding that wave, it's here to stay, and we'll be able to move forward with it.
So there was one more question that came up in the chat, and I'm going to kind of take it up a level from the initial question that was asked, because it was around the need for maybe downsizing, which ties back to digitalization, especially Zpryme research has found, has led to operational efficiency. And a lot of the time that means that it frees people up because they can do their jobs faster. And so they have more time available. So Matt, I'll ask you to start. How does kind of these operational efficiencies, how does that enable employees to create more value for utilities? Because just because you have more time doesn't mean that you need to get rid of your staff. Maybe you just need to give them more things to do, or they can apply or create value for utilities in other ways. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, from my experience, it's nothing new for utilities to be under tight constraints and operational budgets. For as long as I've been working, we're always trying to do more with less. And all this has done is really shift, well, okay, we're now moving rapidly to these digital models. We need the right information at the right time to make these decisions. So when you're talking operational efficiencies now, I think it's that having sources of truth that you trust. You know, like to make decisions, you need good information. And so it's getting that trusted information, and it's sharing across your organization. We see a lot of value in utilities moving to do that through location intelligence. But really what we're moving to is about these efficiencies, and that is, it's not about making jobs redundant. It's about how do you do more with the technology you've got. Utilities are the simplest example, and I'm sure Nancy and Lincoln will do it, they don't trust their data. But now we've got an opportunity where we're digitizing everything. Okay, we do this correctly. We do it once, and it comes back in, and we trust the data. We move on. It's putting all of these digital processes together and then connecting them. Many utilities have spent millions of dollars over the last 5 years putting in AMIs and meters. That information's out there. They're real-time sensors. They understand your network. But are they bringing it back in and making the decisions in the control room and integrating those systems in best practice to bring this together to make better real-time decisions? There's always opportunities to improve and connect your systems and bring things together. We see the value to do that through location, but it's one of those opportunities where it's not about always, removing positions. It's about actually getting the most value out of what you've already invested in.
And Erin, I did want to jump in. So Smud, for the inception of, since the beginning, we've had employees always have the opportunity to move and grow, and which is unique. So I've never been at a company where I've talked to someone that they said they've had 6, 7, 8 different jobs. But that has been the tradition of Smud over the last 75 years. And during the pandemic, we realized that not only that mantra was helpful, is that we needed to change and tweak a little bit of how we staff people internally. So in our community, we have a very large like trade show, education outreach, in-person, customer energy efficiency groups. So we had large groups of people no longer being able to do their jobs. And so we stood up a program very quickly, basically called the Shared Resources Program, that what we did is we matched underutilized staff members to open positions or other positions that were overutilized. And so we looked at their skill set, we looked at their experience, we looked at their desires of wanting to do other things, and we're able to do our own internal match.com to make sure that all of our staff that wasn't as utilized as others, they felt like they can contribute in other parts of the organization. So taking our same model of, if you're interested in another position, we're happy to set you up for success. Where now it's critical jobs that we need employees to do, that we can look at our current workforce and take those people with, retraining and mentorship and support, that they can fill those critical jobs that we need. And, as we look forward and our financial situation is not as bright as it used to be, we have a hiring freeze. And so again, looking from within our internal resources to say, how can we better match people with their wants, desires, experiences, so that we can use the staff that we have and that know the culture and understand Smud, even though it may be dramatically different than what they were doing yesterday. Being at a trade show is very different than, working in in the procurement department, but there are core skills that we can use and transition to new positions. So it's really exciting to see our employees get opportunities that they would not have been able to get to if it wasn't for the pandemic.
Very good. Thank you. And that actually wraps us up. We've gone a little bit over time, but that's okay. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today and offering your insights. And I am going to send things back to Chris Moyer.